The news that we've all been waiting for is finally official. Ricciardo is out of RB and also out of Formula 1, with Liam Lawson replacing him for the last 6 races of the season. Now, to clarify, Lawson hasn't been confirmed at RB for 2025, he has just been slotted in to finish the season, and whilst it's more than likely that in 25 he will be racing in Red Bull colours, the question remains, which Red Bull team will he be racing for? Speaking about Ricciardo's exit, Lawson's promotion and what it means for Red Bull, Helmut Marko, in his usual blunt way on a German podcast, said, "It was clearly communicated that he had to perform significantly better than Yuki Tsunoda, and he only managed that in a few races. He had a 4th place in the sprint race in Miami. But otherwise, Yuki was the stronger driver, and it was clear that this comeback story of the prodigal son returning to Red Bull Racing unfortunately didn't work out. Ricciardo was brought back because he had shown the necessary performance in racing bulls, but you have to see it in a broader context. We have a good pool of talent with Lawson, Iwasa and Hadjar, though this isn't a ranking order. We need to look at the future. We wanted a comparison between Lawson and Yuki so that we know what our driver lineups should look like for the future across both teams." And now the crucial word there was both, which clearly confirms from Helmut Marko that even if Checo's form has improved relative to Max, and even though the performance deficit and balance of the RB20 is still the team's main priority, they still have doubts about Checo being there for next season. Given that they felt Ricciardo didn't do enough to warrant replacing Checo and thus didn't have a future at Red Bull, despite the atrocious way in which they handled it before and during the Singapore weekend, their decision to drop him now in favour of Lawson was the right one. It's widely known, and Marko, Ricciardo and Lawson have all confirmed it, that the end of September was always going to be the time in which they had to make a decision. This is because Lawson signed a contract which stated that by the end of September, Red Bull either had to give him a drive or he would become a free agent and could go to any team he wants. Now, given that he's only been signed to finish this season and not yet to drive for either team in 2025, we still don't know if those contractual obligations have actually been fulfilled. But regardless, until Lawson was officially announced, it put him in a very uncomfortable position because had Red Bull not picked up his option, the only other available seat left on the grid is at Sauber. Given that Ricciardo's level of performance relative to Yuki wasn't enough to keep him in Formula 1 and wasn't enough to convince Marko that he should be promoted to Red Bull, what does Lawson then have to do to force his way into the conversation? For Liam to become a factor, I think 2 things have to happen simultaneously. First and foremost, he has to outperform Yuki in a few races and maybe even score a couple of points finishes that will really grab the attention of Marko, and on top of that, Checo also has to have a run of bad races compared to Max, which in combination might cause the team to lose enough confidence in him and be tempted to go for Lawson. Contrary to popular belief, Red Bull really do want to make it work with Checo. The bar for Lawson to even be in the conversation for that seat is going to be very high, and under most circumstances their preferred option is always going to be to keep Checo unless things become untenable in the Constructors' Championship. Even after their crisis talks during the summer, where it almost looked like Checo might be dropped there and then, they chose to give him more time to see him around his stronger tracks, and even though his form did improve in Monza and especially Baku, performances like Singapore, where the car was clearly better with Max going on to finish in 2nd, whilst Checo got knocked out in Q2 and finished in 10th, just throws away all of that credit that he was starting to build back up. That inconsistency and also paranoia about the consequences next year is why Marko has left the door open for 2025 and also why he's decided to evaluate Lawson. Now, something I have said consistently throughout this year is that because of how volatile and crazy this season has been, especially when it comes to Red Bull, public perception and even the reporting in the media about who's going to be where basically changes every couple of races. Absolutely no one, including Red Bull themselves, know what's going to happen or who's going to be where by the time we get to next season. Because depending on how the last few races went for a particular driver, that seems to change the narrative about their position and security within the organisation basically overnight. Only Horner and Marko will really know what they want to see from Lawson for him to become a contender. Keeping in mind that the bar is going to be incredibly high, in 6 races, I think they'll want to see him beat Yuki in their race head-to-head. This is where luck, however, will play a massive part in terms of the competitiveness of the car. In the races in which he's quicker than Yuki, if the car is then also able to score points, maybe once or twice in the last 6 races, that will definitely get Red Bull's attention. Another big thing that they'll be looking out for that isn't linked to his on-track performances is his mentality. One of the reasons why Yuki has been passed up by Red Bull is because they don't believe that he has the right mentality and emotional control to race at the front of the grid under the highest level of pressure where everything you do and everything you say is scrutinized to the nth degree. I must say, I think this argument is now a little bit unfair towards Yuki because he is not the same driver that he was in 2021, and usually now when he's been frustrated recently, it's been justified, like when RB give him one of their trademark awful strategies. And now, the truth is that if you are a race-winning driver, and especially if you are a world champion, you can pretty much say and do whatever you want, because at the end of the day, people know that you can perform under pressure. For drivers in the midfield like Lawson who aren't experienced, who don't have that pedigree of results, and have never even driven a race-winning car, they have to prove above and beyond that they've got the intangibles to handle the pressure of racing at the front. My advice to Lawson would be to look at how Piastri has gone about it since making his debut. Calm, composed, and even when things have gone wrong, regardless if it's his fault or the team's, he never loses his cool over the radio where people can use it against him. Lawson has to be exactly the same, because we know that Horner and Marko will be watching him very closely, and just one outburst at the wrong time will be used forever against him as evidence of a driver who can't cope with the pressure of racing in the midfield, and thus will never be able to cope with the pressure of racing at the front. They'll also keep a close eye on the way in which he works inside the team. We know that drivers in the past, and specifically Pierre Gasly, during his time with Red Bull in 2019, actually fell out with the team when things got tough, and that left a lasting impression even after Gasly was demoted. Luckily for Lawson, having made his debut there last year, having done plenty of testing, and being the reserve driver this year who was always in the garage, he has already had plenty of time to cultivate those relationships with the mechanics and engineers, and so I think it'll be relatively easy for him to slot into Ricciardo's seat and be comfortable with the team around him. The one person that I do feel sorry for in this scenario, however, is Yuki. Because whilst this season all of the talk has been about Ricciardo, Checo, Lawson, and even after Ricciardo's announcement, there is still people trying to make the case for why he should be in that Red Bull over Checo. Yuki in the background this season has just quietly gone about doing his own thing. In 18 races, Yuki has scored points 8 times. He leads Ricciardo in all of their head-to-heads. He has also scored almost double the points that Ricciardo has scored, and yet literally no one cares because recently he's had a run of 2 or 3 bad races. Yuki is basically in a lose-lose situation going up against Lawson, because if he beats him, then absolutely no one is going to care or give him credit for it. If it's quite close, which is what I think is going to happen, then I think both Yuki and Liam are going to be criticized for different reasons, and if he's beaten by Liam, then he'll have absolutely everyone on his back about how overrated he is. Or when it comes to Yuki, I'm definitely going to try and make a dedicated video later in the year about him because he has found himself in such a bizarre situation in his career, performing quite well this season, arguably the best he's ever performed in Formula 1 for a team and organisation who basically don't want him and don't see a future with him. It's quite incredible that for a team which last season created the most dominant car in the history of the sport and achieved all of this incredible success and broke all of these records with Max, it now finds itself clinging on to the Drivers' Championship on track, and it also finds itself in a total mess with both of its teams off track. They can't seem to decide whether or not they still have confidence in Checo, which I'm sure is massively frustrating for him more than anyone else, but due to their mismanagement, it's opened the door of opportunity for Liam Lawson. Despite the abuse that he's been getting online, which I feel obliged to mention, mainly from ridiculous Ricciardo fans that feel as though somehow it's his fault after doing a great job last year and warranting a full-time opportunity, that somehow he's the one to blame for Ricciardo's fate, the point is that now it's over to Liam to prove how good he really is. Like last year, he's not exactly coming in under the best circumstances, and certainly not with the best preparation, but unlike last year, there is definitely more pressure and expectations on his shoulders now, given how good he was the last time we saw him, and also with a Red Bull drive on the line, as Helmut Marko has admitted. Lawson and Colapinto are two great examples of drivers who grabbed an opportunity with both of their hands and forced their way into Formula 1, despite not really being on anyone's radar for a Formula 1 seat before they made their debuts. The only question now with the prospect and uncertainty around that second Red Bull seat, which has only been perpetuated more by the team itself, is what can Lawson do to potentially force his way into Red Bull for 2025. Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe, that would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.